Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the very first edition of In Conversation with Changemakers. And this is my opportunity to sit down with individuals or companies that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years or been following over the years that I genuinely believe have an impact and change on our communities, our businesses, our government, education systems. So I'm really, really pleased to announce the first change makers of this series, Corrie and James from InnovationAus. Good afternoon, Corrie and James. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hey, Luli, how are you?
Hi, Luli.
And we're keeping this very real and raw, so no frills. Like Corrie, it looks like you're in your living room and there's children around, it would seem.
You can see my arm waves like a bit of a windmill intermittently. It's the lockdown wave.
It's a lockdown wave. That's my lockdown wave that I've been practicing. So I'm going to start off with a question that I'm sure that everyone's front of mind, and that's what inspired you to create InnovationAus? I'm going to flick that to you, James.
Look, I've been a journalist for a long time. I guess I was a technology journalist. I had always written about the tech industry. Look, since very early on in my career, I was just interested in industry policy. Like I always had this thing in my head that Australian companies could be doing better than they were doing. In particular, around my personal bugbear is around government procurement policy and around some government policies that can help local companies compete in global markets. So anyway, it's very early in my career I was interested in those issues, and then I found myself in a place where I had an opportunity to to pursue that in a very niche market way. Obviously, publishing has changed radically. I had, I'd spent time in my career in industry magazines, in technology sections of newspapers, but it was at a time when the Australian was doing 50 and 60 broadsheet pages of tech. It was crazy. But obviously those days are well past. And the tech itself has enabled this proliferation of deep niche publishing, and that's what we are. We cover a very narrowly focused area of subject matter, and good for me because I'm interested in it. And we found that there's an audience for it. So there we are. Oh, and I should mention my publisher is also my wife. So
Good of you to give a mention there.
Was able to arm twist her. I could arm twist her in a way, and I'm the editorial side of this business, and Corrie is the publisher commercial side, and that in itself has worked quite well.
Yeah, and I'll just say, look, from my perspective, I think when InnovationAus launched, I had run a comms company for probably 11 years by that stage, maybe 12. And I really was feeling the pinch that sort of the triumvirate, if you like, of clients, staff, and the declining media landscape was really, everyone was trying to plan what's next. How do we work around this? Where you can see there's sort of diminishing returns on. And at the same time, I guess the opportunity was you could see a little bit of a vacuum in the experience in the tech sector. And it was a little bit of a kind of a hypothesis that if we've sort of been racing towards this kind of, click through, like the market-driven journalism was really creating what I would see as a bit of a distortion of the quality of journalism. I think we've seen that all over the world. And it was, I guess, starting, InnovationAus, and obviously James was passionate about it, and I had known him in a previous life, and there's a lot of respect for the old school journalism. And I guess the thesis was, if we invest in this, what will happen? And it was kind of a little bit of a hunch, and I think it's probably taken a lot longer to pan out than what any of us would have thought, but it's definitely been an important and worthwhile journey, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm delighted for it because it's great to have that that independence and that viewpoint, and keep us all honest, I think. So I guess James, you've touched on it already, but in regards to some of the biggest changes that you're seeing in government policy currently that impact innovation and tech?
I just take a moment to think about it, but I suppose at any stage when you're talking about industrial policy or industrial policy, whether it's focused at the manufacturing sector or biotech or information technology, which I tend to steer towards, it's access. It really just is three things: access to capital, access to markets, access to skills. So have we got the people? Have we got the money? Have we got the markets to go to? There's, to a greater or a lesser degree, an emphasis on each of those. I suppose there's a couple of things I would say. One is, I'll just say the National Innovation and Science Agenda, so Malcolm Turnbull's Ideas Boom of 2015, it kind of, it's had mixed reviews over the years, but I think you would definitely say that was the line where things started to get interesting in this country. I know that the focus on innovation policy kind of went off the boil after the 2016 election, but that baseline of interest that the Ideas Boom created is a really a line, a before and after moment in industrial policy in our tech sector. So that's interesting. Now, one of those areas that was incredibly successful, I think, is in venture capital or early stage capital, and certain policies that were enabled then, capital gains tax free on certain kinds of venture capital funds, enabled a huge amount of money to be raised, hugely successful. There were some skills policy that were also, that have demonstrably been very successful in enabling very high level skills to get into the country. And to enable returning Australians to land in a market that was way more interesting than it was pre-2015. So we have that ecosystem, that policy directed towards ecosystem rather than individual levers. I don't know. Most important policy now, I suppose, again, access to skills.
Yeah.
Borders are shut. It's hard to get people. And they're reviewing the venture capital arrangements now. So we're unsure where that will land.
And you say that as well, James, but even pre-borders being shut, the access to skills has always been one that's been highly contested around changes to 457 visas and what that's meant to the industry. So I think it's been a challenge or something that's been highly discussed even before the borders being closed and really hampering that issue.
Can I add to everything that James has just said? And I'd say the most important thing right now is not what policy, is just consistency of policy. I think just to play a long game, we know, particularly when we're talking about some of the industrial policy stuff that James is talking about, whether it's advanced manufacturing or quantum or all of these really exciting areas, these are not 2 and 3 years. These don't flip from election cycle to election cycle. Having an ability to kind of be able to comfortably understand a direction from a policy perspective in 5 and 10 year blocks, I think would be very welcome. You might not agree with it, but at least you can, accommodate the direction.
I think I had a very senior, the chief executive of a government-owned not-for-profit, which is involved in the innovation space, call me at the latest change of industry minister at the federal level. Obviously, Christian Porter was appointed, and he said they don't even bother calling the ministers by their actual names. They Karen Andrews was M7 because she was the 7th that this person had dealt with, and Christian Porter's M8.
Yeah, and I guess that brings on to my next question in regards to when we say innovation, what do we actually really mean, and what are some of the biggest challenges facing innovation in tech in Australia? Because I think innovation became very fashionable, right? It was the big sort of ticket item. It was the big thing that we could kind of do. But what does it actually really mean, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, it is a very elastic term. There's no doubt about that. I guess, look, from the Innovation Oz point of view, we had a very definite set of readers that we had in mind. I mean, not readers, like this kind of who's our not target audience, but when we talk about building a strong Australian industry, I guess the people we had in mind were companies that produce their own IP, had either the potential or actual ability to export product, who had real revenues, and also who very likely had either worked with institutional research or had taken institutional research out of the institution and commercialized it. So those are some of the criteria that we look at. But definitely building your own IP or translating your own IP. Corrie will have more to say on this.
Well, I've been going through the some of the government grant recipients, and obviously there's a lot of due diligence from some of these companies in terms of getting awarded a grant, and some of those companies, and there are hundreds of them, thousands of them, are doing the most interesting work, solving the most interesting problems. And they're not companies you'd ever really hear about because they really are, head down, bum up. So those companies that are innovative are really taking technology and applying them to solving really interesting problems. And the stuff that I get excited about is the cross-disciplinary stuff. Where do we have really strong capability and where are we marrying that into new sectors? So, I carry on all about Met sector, all the technology that's built off the back of our very successful mining industry. How do we apply it to space and ag tech and, the IoT component and remote access? So there's so many amazing stories of where we're taking really deep pools of intellectual property and solving problems that are just, they're pulling sharper into focus every day, particularly with the sovereign capability, the food bowl of Asia. All of these things we talk about take a constant review of the way we're solving the challenges. So I get pretty excited because there's a lot of stuff that at the moment doesn't bubble up into our public consciousness that really should. And I think that's something that keeps me energized.
Yeah, and I think that point, Corey, around using tech to solve a particular problem, and I think people don't sometimes consider that to be innovation. They'll think innovation needs to be some new widget that someone's developing in a garage somewhere, as opposed to the using technology to solve problems. Yeah. So I mean, James, we've touched on the pandemic and the impact it's had on access to skills. But do you see it's changed anyway? The way that new tech is coming to market at all has had any impact on that side of things?
Oh, well, I mean, I think every Zoom call on technology has remarked on the fact how everything has accelerated and digital transformation has accelerated. And look, it certainly has. Look, just off the top of my head, I think an interesting space to watch will be in government service delivery. It sounds incredibly dull and boring, but I think the pandemic will have had an incredible impact on the way that citizens interact with government. I spoke recently with Victor Dominello, who was going through some of the changes that have been made at Service New South Wales, some of the products that have been put forward at Service New South Wales, particularly around, it sounds very strange, but the Dine and Discover vouchers. Now, to qualify for a Dine and Discover vouchers for your readers, you could order a takeaway meal with a dining voucher, or you could go to I don't know, a wildlife park. Yeah. So it was a great thing, but you had to prove that you were a New South Wales citizen, and to do that, you gave them 100 points. Now, when you combine that Dine and Discover plus the Tell Us Once capability, so once you've told Service New South Wales, they're not going to keep asking you for the same information. So you've given them the 100 points. So suddenly that Service New South Wales app has identified you as an individual. Then suddenly the ability to serve different government services you very easily and simply is in place. And look, it's not something people think about, but 5 million people downloaded Dine and Discover. So the New South Wales government, instead of having like 50 different departments and agencies, each offering 10 different services and having to connect with that user, that app is now super easy. Apparently, the engagement with even the digital driver's license, once people have done Dine and Discover, a mass followed across to do digital driver's lessons. Yeah, I was one of them.
Yeah. Well, pre-pandemic, I mean, it's. I mean, I did have a digital driving license already, and but I could have asked 10 friends if they knew Service New South Wales or they had an app, and 9 would have said no, one maybe. And now, like everybody interacts. It's like fish and chips. Yeah, I'm English, yeah, but everybody knows. Of course, everyone knows Service New South Wales.
Yeah, and I think, look, and genuinely, over the years, I think Service New South Wales was started in 2013, 14, so it's been, a bit of a journey, as they say, and all the way along that journey, the reps from Service New South Wales and Victor Dominello himself has been talking about, we've got to get public services to, match the private sector services you get with online banking.
Well, they did that with who they brought in, the original people they brought in. Glenn King, ex banking. They knew that from the beginning, right?
That's right. And I think even at the highest levels in New South Wales, the highest levels of government, right from, Barry O'Farrell at the start and Mike Baird and now Gladys have had an interest in seeing this through. And obviously Dominic Perrottet has been with Victor Dominello, have been, political advocates for tech.
So I guess at a state level, there's been that consistency that you were mentioning, Corey. That's important in regards to the continuum of these types of initiatives.
Yeah, I think the federal government's probably had some greater difficulty than the states in this area, but
We watch with interest.
we watch with interest.
I guess, I mean, the other area where I've seen a massive leap in, I guess, barriers that have previously been there would be in health. Like telehealth has been a discussion and a topic forever, right? And then a pandemic happens, and all of a sudden those things that we couldn't do, we can do almost overnight. So and I think now people have had that experience in regards to variety in how they access health services and healthcare providers. Do you think that's something that will continue over time?
I was interested in the first, like 4 months probably of last year through COVID, where suddenly all of these things that were really difficult became really simple. And renewing a script and having to go to the doctor, like, "Oh, you can do that? It's not that hard." And there are many examples which made us actually kinda go, "Oh, okay." It's when you sort of get shaken out of the thinking patterns. And when talking about innovation, you were asking earlier, like, what is it? And I hope one of the enduring sort of, outcomes of something like COVID is that people did get sort of a bit shaken out of their ways of thinking that might and it was just I don't want to you would hope that by looking at things you take for granted, we think about in a certain way. If a percentage of the population will look at things through new eyes, I mean, hopefully that will create, different ways we look at the problems that we solve and the fact that they're actually really not big problems and a sense of energy and ambition. I hope we don't snap back to relaxation mode, as is sometimes what Australians can be characterised as being in.
I don't think anyone's going to be able to relax for a while yet, so so we're all good.
That's a whole new different conversation, right? I think we could spend an hour talking about that. I mean, I guess one of the biggest, and we've spoken about it offline, but one of the biggest challenges with COVID is our ability to network. And we've all become creatures of habit and relied on that on a way to engage effectively. So I guess are you seeing effective leaders in innovation coming together in a meaningful way in the current climate, or how are they coming together in a meaningful way?
Oh, I'm a bit vexed on this one. I look, I have been involved in conversations over the past 18 months where I think that there is a tendency for people to kind of look at what they can get rather than what they can bring. And I think that if we're truly going to do things differently, when our time is scarce, our ability to meet in person is scarce, when I think a fundamental rethink of what networking means, and what I mean in terms of what value can I offer, what do I have right now? If we're in crisis mode, what am I bringing? How am I creating better quality networks between people I know? What am I bringing? What am I offering? I think I would like to see more of that. I think it is a time like this where the kind of generosity of networking is even more important. And it's kind of hard to put your finger on, but I think people in your own life that do that naturally, and they're the people that when the chips are down, you gravitate towards uplifting. So that's just sounds very philosophical, but I think it's true.
Yeah, no, agreed, agreed.
I mean, I would add very specifically on how the industry responded to COVID, and there were, very genuine efforts for different parts of the, tech landscape, the different kind of industry groups to come together for common purpose. But it fractured back into these siloed areas of, I'm not going to say self-interest, but these different industry groups have different stakeholders, and they kind of, without wishing to be unfair, because there was a lot of genuine goodwill, did kind of break back to type fairly quickly, which was, I don't know if it's unfortunate or not, but certainly the goals for creating a unified voice of the industry to government, didn't quite pan out.
And I think it's something to be mindful of, is making sure the industry is inclusive. I think what happens when you lose that physical networking capability. You don't have that opportunity to go meet a minister and shake his hand in the way that you would in a physical event. So unless you're being included, then you miss out and maybe not aware of some of the opportunities that are available to you.
Luli, I read something the other day which was absolutely spot on, and it was, the data that shows your proximity, your physical proximity to your boss as an indicator of how fast you move. And I had been in the podcast studio when we were first in a lighter lockdown with one of my colleagues, and I was talking about a role we were hiring. She said, "I can do that. I can do that job." And I was like, "Great, you can do it." Anyway, she now has that job a week later. But I remember thinking that is exactly it. And that's one sort of young woman with a toddler who was there talking to a boss saying, "I can do that." Now imagine those sorts of interactions across all aspects of the workforce and all of the diversity that includes. It's not nothing. And it's not because she would be unlikely to set up a Zoom call to have a conversation with me, that because she might not have heard about it in the first place. And secondly, it's a different thing to set up a call to have a conversation to apply for a job that hasn't actually really been fully mapped out yet. And that comes to, first of all, you need to be in the tent to know what's happening and who's in the tent and who's out. It does put lots of focus on exactly that notion of inclusivity.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's something for us all to be mindful of. But I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to thank you both for being my first in conversation with change makers, and you truly are. And thank you for everything you bring every day with InnovationAus. I look forward to seeing that in my inbox. So continue what you're doing. I'm sure there are great things to come down the line, and I, for one, look forward to reading them. So thank you, Corrie and James.
Thanks, Luli. Fantastic.
Thanks, Luli. It's been lovely to talk with you.